Hello and welcome to Balancing Act Life and Struggles of a Teenage Girl, a mental health and wellness and semi unfiltered podcast made for teens by a teen. I'm your host, Morea, a 16-year-old girl from New York. And here on Balancing Act, I bring you weekly episodes featuring relatable conversations, personal stories, and practical insights to help you navigate life's balancing act and related challenges, and to remind you that you are not alone. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Balancing Act Life and Struggles of a Teenage Girl. This is a great episode for learning more about cognitive behavioral therapy and some fundamental and practical skills and techniques for navigating some common challenges that come up in teen life, like managing anxiety in general, navigating tension with parents, approaching tough conversations with friends, and realizing that there is so much more to your identity than just school. In this episode, I am so lucky to have been joined by Dr. Rachel Hutt, a licensed clinical psychologist and co founder of Mindwell, New York City, where she provides individual and group therapy to people of all ages dealing with anxiety, depression, and behavioral challenges. Dr. Hutt specializes in using CBT and DBT to help her patients, and in addition to her clinical work at Mindwell, she's the author of Feeling Better, a CBT workbook for teens designed to teach essential skills and activities to help you manage moods, boost self esteem, and conquer anxiety. And we'll be talking about this book and its techniques a lot in today's episode. I thoroughly enjoyed recording this episode and was honestly blown away by some of the techniques that Dr. Hutt shared. And I really hope that you enjoy this episode. So let's just dive straight into it. Thank you so much, Dr. Hutt, for taking the time to come on the podcast today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be on here talking.
Thanks. So, just starting off, one of the things that your book helps teenagers with is conquering anxiety. And anxiety is something that a lot of teenagers experience and struggle with, even if they're not necessarily diagnosed for having an anxiety disorder. So, can you just start off by helping us to define what anxiety is?
Sure. I think there's anxiety the way we talk about it, which is very clinical, right? And there are certain symptoms in anxiety disorder, right, that people have. And that has to do with having some physical symptoms like constant stress and tension, right? Maybe heart beats a lot, right? Sometimes people might have some panic. There's also a lot of thought related symptoms like constant worrying, right? Not being able to focus on the present moment, difficulty concentrating. And then there's also behavioral components to anxiety, which have to do a lot of times with avoidance, right? A lot of times we feel really anxious about something and then we don't actually do it. And so there's a lot of potential symptoms that go into what an anxiety disorder is. I think most teenagers don't talk about it in that way. They talk about it a little more of worries and stress, right? And maybe sometimes it affects your sleep or it kind of affects your day to day. It affects your relationships with your family. It affects relationships with friends. It affects your grades and school and romantic relationships, right? So there's a lot of places where when you have these worries or when you're just feeling a lot of stress related to outside circumstances, it can just really get in your way and get you stuck.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I guess, is there a reason why we as humans experience anxiety? Because it seems like this thing that, it gets you stuck, it can interfere with your relationships, with your family, your friends, romantic relationships. What's the reason why, I guess, evolutionarily,
Yeah, that's a
we
great. I'm
have
glad
to
you asked that.
experience
I love the
anxiety?
question. So I don't know if you've heard of the fight or flight response, maybe. Sometimes in biology, they talk about this, but when we were a long time ago, when we were like cave people and we lived outside, right? We needed anxiety to help us protect ourselves, to survive, right? We didn't have the time to be like, let me figure out what to do, right? You were chased by a giant creature, right? You had to run, or you had to freeze, right? And sometimes the freezing response that unfortunately now sometimes gets us stuck in our current life was actually really helpful. But it's like if you see a bear, right, outside, sometimes you're supposed to freeze and not act, and that is helpful. And so we've adapted with these same traits that we had when we needed them a long time ago. And we do still need them because anxiety sometimes still motivates us, right? If, we live in New York City and let's say you're about to cross the street and it looks like, you have the right of way, but a car's not stopping, right? We need anxiety to be like, don't cross the street, don't walk. Like you need that jolt to be like, oh, stand back. And so it is really helpful. Or if you have a big test coming up, a little bit of anxiety might help you study, help you get motivated. The problem, unfortunately, for a lot of people is it goes a little too far. Maybe we're anxious about a test to the point where we're stuck. We can't even study. We can't focus. It gets to be too strong. We have that freezing response or we avoid. And so while some anxiety can be really helpful, sometimes we're carrying too much that maybe wasn't necessarily adapted well as time went on from what we had as humans a long time ago.
Definitely, definitely. And one of the ways that people can start to manage their anxiety is CBT. And so, just kind of getting into CBT, I remember when we had talked previously, you had mentioned the CBT triangle. So, can you explain to listeners what that is? Because it can sound kind of confusing if you
Yes,
don't really know anything about
totally.
CBT.
Yes. So, I was mentioning earlier when you asked about what anxiety is, the CBT triangle it's a triangle because it has 3 points. The first point has to do with your physical experience. So, when you're anxious, maybe your heart starts pounding faster, or sometimes you might have trouble breathing. You might get really hot. You might feel kind of tense. So, there's a physical component. Then you have thoughts, and that's a very big part of anxiety, right? And often they're worry thoughts, but they can be like, what's happening? I'm not going to do well. Things aren't going well. Everything's going to be horrible. My friend hates me, all those kinds of thoughts. And then the third point on the triangle has to do with our behavior. And that's what I was talking about avoidance before, right? That often when we're really anxious, we tend to avoid, or sometimes we hyperfocus, which also might not be that helpful. We can't get off the topic. And so CBT, we sort of understand the the experience that people have with anxiety through that lens, that it's a triangle and they're all connected. And the bad news is that they're all connected because then each one makes the other one worse. You have the thought like, oh, my friend hates me. And then you start to like your heart starts to pound and then you want to go home. But the good news is that they're all connected in that when you learn skills from any of the points, it can help every other point. So there are skills for relaxing your body, which can help calm down your thoughts and maybe make it more easier for you to not avoid, right? To do the thing that you needed to do. There are skills you can use to help your thoughts, and then they help the other two. And there are skills that you can use to tackle really difficult, let's say you're avoiding a party or avoiding a conversation, right? By using some skills to approach it instead of avoiding it, that can also help the other areas. And that's really what CBT is. It's skills in these areas to really help reduce anxiety across the board.
That's so, so interesting, and it makes a lot of sense how everything is kind of interconnected, how the way that we feel physically can inform our thoughts and our behaviors, and just how our thoughts can inform the way that we feel. It makes so much sense. And
Yeah.
so when you're able to learn skills to address different parts of this triangle, that can be so, so helpful. So I guess just starting off with some basic CBT skills. Let's say somebody walks into your office for the first time, they're dealing with anxiety. What would be your go to tips and techniques for addressing each part of this CBT triangle? Just like the
Yeah.
basics.
Yes. So the very first skill that I teach always is a really cool one. Again, I'm going to reference biology here. If anybody's taken it, you might be familiar with what I'm going to talk about. So our body has something called the dive reflex, which is very cool. So when we dive into a pool, typically our face hits the water, right? And so there's an area, and you can see me, but right under our eyes, right? So directly under our eyes at the top of our, further up than like where our cheekbones are, but right under our eyes, when we hit the water, because again, evolution, when we used to be creatures that could live underwater, we have the capability that our bodies believe we're going to be underwater for long periods of time. And it actually slows down our breathing, slows down our heart rate, and because our bodies think we're going to be underwater for longer. And so we can mimic this, right? You don't have to go dive into a pool every time you're anxious, right? You can get an ice pack or like a Ziploc bag with cold water, even a cold paper towel with, what with water on it. Put it under your eyes, hold it there for like 2 minutes, and your body will have the same response. Your heart rate will slow down, your breathing will slow down, and it'll calm down your body. It's really
That's
cool.
that's so cool.
Yeah.
I didn't know that, but it
No,
also
I know.
makes
They don't
so much
always
sense.
teach that.
Like,
Yeah, yeah, it's really cool, and some people, like, if you're having a panic attack, for example, you could literally and people do this, put your face in a bowl of cold water. Hold your breath and, like dive almost, right? And it
oh,
helps so much. And so anyone who struggles with panic or physical symptoms of anxiety, that is by far the best skill because, there is a skill of deep breathing, right? I'm sure anyone who's ever tried to learn skills, that's like the first one you learn. And first of all, if you do it wrong, it doesn't work anyway. But second of all, the hard part is you have to control your breath, right? You have to be the one to do it. And in these moments, it's really hard to do. And so it is sometimes even hard to remember to get an ice pack, but at least if you're able to have access to something, all you have to do is grab it and put on your face and it does the rest for you.
that honestly just blows my mind. I've never heard of that technique before,
Yeah.
but it makes so much sense, especially because when I'm stressed and I go in the water, that helps me to calm down almost instantly. And that just makes so much sense because your heart rate slows down and everything, and if you can mimic that without diving into a pool, it's such a convenient and pretty much
Yes.
foolproof way of
Yes. And
so that's
one
that's so amazing.
yeah, and one more thing about that, if anybody likes that idea that I recommend is you can and you all might have this in like the school nurse or something, but those disposable ice packs they have, it's like water and ice and you pop it. They sometimes have it in the nurse or like at camp. If you've ever seen it, you can buy those at a pharmacy or on Amazon. And so you could like have it in your backpack at school. And then if like you have a hard moment, you just go to the bathroom and pop it and put on your face in the stall. So like you don't even have to like you can go to the nurse, right? But like this would be like even on the go, you can carry it with you.
That is so, so cool. Okay, so that's the number one go-to technique for, like,
Yes.
one part of the triangle, which is the way that you're feeling physically, are which, of course, helps to influence the other 2 parts of the triangle. Are there any other go-to techniques you have for the other parts of the
Yes.
triangle?
Another go-to skill I would use when it comes to thoughts, and there are a lot of them, is really something called check the facts, which is really what it sounds like. So if you've ever done debate team, right, you know that like when you're presenting evidence, right, it has to be real evidence, right? You're making an argument for your case, but to do that, to really be convincing, you need to like show real evidence, or if you've done, I guess, any kind of model UN where you use some of that stuff, but you need facts. And yeah, you could make a strong opinion for your case, but people are going to be way more likely to believe you, your side wins if you have facts. And so this is requiring you to be somewhat calm. So it might be good to do that other skill, the ice skill first, and then do the skill with your thoughts to really be like, okay, what are my actual facts? Which means if I was in a court of law and I had a jury in front of me, they would accept these facts. And what's interesting is most of the time we don't have many facts for our worries. If you're like, I'm going to fail this test, and that's your worry, if you were in my office, I'd say, okay, well, what's the evidence that you're going to fail this test? And you might say, well, I didn't study. And I'm saying, okay, you didn't study. We'll put that down. Like, that's a fact. Right. And then I'd ask, have you failed any other test? right? Well, the answer could be yes. Maybe I failed one like last year. Maybe the answer is no. I've never failed a test. Okay, well, that's not very convincing evidence that you're going to fail this one if you've never failed a test before, right? Or the test you did fail was a very different situation. You were really sick and something happened, right? Not very convincing evidence. Okay, let's look at other evidence that might suggest you were going to fail. Um, did you learn this material? Were you there? Did you understand it? Well, maybe you didn't fully understand it, but like, yeah, you were there that day and like you did the homework. So we're looking at facts to really understand. And a lot of times when we check the facts, our worries are not actually founded. And so there are times I will say that there are some facts to support it, and then we might need some other skill. But I will say the majority of the time when I do this with people, the facts don't line up to the worry. So just holding yourself, pretending you are in a court of law, you're in a debate, you've got to like present evidence that is flawless, that nobody's going to say, nope, that's just your opinion. Okay. So that's the second skill. And that has to do with your thoughts. Another example there is like if you're like your friend didn't respond to your text and it's been several hours and you're like, oh, they're mad at me. And like a lot of people think that, but what's the evidence? Did your friend actually say they're mad at you? Have they acted any differently towards you? No, they just didn't text me for a few hours, which is unusual. Okay. Did they tell you they had any plans today? Well, yeah, they were going to be like going shopping with their mom. Okay. Is it possible that maybe they didn't look at their phone or they don't have a chance, So it's like going through some of that stuff, right? And really checking the facts.
That's also an amazing tip. The way that you presented it with the visual of being in front of a court, I feel like that is something that I could definitely apply to my own life because I know when I get stressed, it feels like whatever I'm feeling inside of me is like the facts, my feelings, my emotions, my anxiety, that all becomes the facts. But then I guess when you have to present them to something, even if it's an imaginary jury, that really
Yeah.
makes you rethink it and realize that, hey, you know, those quote unquote facts are not really that strong. And maybe this is not something that I have to be stressing over as much as I am right now. So, like you were talking about before, anxiety was really helpful in the past when maybe we had to like run away from bears and stuff like that. But in modern day life, it comes up in situations that aren't as helpful, like in terms of school, relationships, and being at home or with friends. So I
Yeah.
was hoping that we could go through some of these parts of life that are really important to teenagers and just demonstrate a few CBT skills that can help the listener in these areas of their life. So
Sure. Yeah.
I
Do you
guess,
have a domain you want to start in?
yeah, so maybe starting off with like at home with your family.
Sure.
What are some skills that the listener can use?
Okay. So I think at home, one of the complaints that I hear from a lot of the teens I work with are disagreements with parents. Right? As you know, teenage years can be a tough time with parents, right? You want to be more independent, you feel more responsible, right? Want to be able to go do more. And sometimes your parents might be okay with that. And a lot of times, at least for the teens that I work with, parents are not necessarily on the same page with their kids. So there's this idea of trying to work with your parents a little more collaboratively to find a happy medium. And this hopefully will help you to both not be so upset and angry with your parents all the time. And also, your parents will be less upset and maybe help them to budge a little bit more in some of those areas. So, we want to take sort of a hot topic that is going on at home and try to sort of understand, okay, where do you stand? Where do your parents stand? And can we start to slowly, in a tiny way, move the needle in a way that your parents will actually allow? So, Maria, I don't know if there's a topic that you want to share that we can use, or I can give some examples if it's hard to think of one that it comes up for you.
I can think of some that have been very relevant in the past for me. I remember just stuff always surrounding food, like because I dealt with an eating disorder and it was a lot of tension in my family around just like eat and I remember literally, like, we were sitting outside and I literally, like, shoved my plate, like, off the table and just, like so that was something that was extremely tense for a while.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really hard I mean, and there's a lot of emotions there, and that can be
Yeah.
really, really tough when you're struggling with eating challenges. And, eating, as you know, can be really tough in families because you grow up with your parents who have their own beliefs about food and about what's right and about what you should do, right? And sometimes you might agree and sometimes you might not. And you're growing up in a very different time than your parents, right? And things are different. And that can be really tough for parents to also understand. So, in a situation like that, where maybe on the one hand, they're like trying to force you to eat. And on the other hand, you might feel like there are maybe some situations where I feel more comfortable eating than others. And we would want to kind of look at a scale. Like if we're giving 0 to 10, 10 is them saying you must eat all of this right now, all the time. Let me ask you then, where would you put yourself? What number would you be at if that was 10?
In terms of what I wanted for myself?
Yes.
Okay, well, at the time, I was really struggling, so I was probably at, like, a 1.
Okay.
Like, I didn't
And
want to.
And would you say that 10 is right for what I'm saying based on what you're describing of them for them, or what number
Yeah,
would you put them at? Yeah, okay.
probably
So you
like
were
an
to
8,
1 and
10.
they were to 10. So and see, finding a way to make it numerical like that on a scale can be really helpful, right? Because ultimately, you can understand where it's really difficult, of course, for you to go from a 1 to a 10, right? And they, are just I guess where you were was just so far from where they wanted you to be that they probably were not willing to accept that level, right? And so rather than when we're working to try to find this happy medium, the goal is can we move the needle a little bit, right? And so for you, it might be okay, are they willing to come down from a 10 to like an 8 to start, right? Or are they willing to go to a 7? Or can you work to go to a 2 or a 3, right? And so it's maybe having conversations with them to say, like, I know you want me to eat all this right now. Could I, would you be okay if like I had, this part of my meal and then in 2 hours I'll eat this part or something, something like that. Because I think a lot of times we get stuck in the extremes, especially with parents. And parents get stuck, by the way. It's not just teens, right? Parents certainly get stuck in their extremes. And it's hard to be the one that has to be the voice of reason sometimes between you and your parents. And we know parents are going to be more receptive if you're willing to give a little bit, then they might be more willing to give a little bit. Right. If
Yeah,
that makes sense. So rather than the goal of you being like, no, they need to come to me, I'm at a 1, like, and I'm not, it's like 1 or bust, right? And that often won't work is okay, can you go to a 2 or 3? Or can you ask them to maybe come down a little bit? And maybe between the two, they'd be more willing. Does that
yeah.
make sense?
That makes a lot of sense because I know that for me, I find that a lot of people are pretty defensive, and so when they feel like you're saying that they're completely wrong and you're completely right, they don't budge. But like you're saying, if you give a little bit, then they'll feel like they can kind of move too, and then you'll meet them in the middle. I feel like for this specific situation, for me and my eating disorder, the fact that it was an eating disorder, which is like a light threatening disease, can make it a little bit more complicated because
Yes.
in this case, I did have to eat what they were telling me to eat,
Yes. I
but
understand. Yeah.
it was definitely challenging, and I feel like when it comes to grades, pressure from parents in terms of wanting to get the best grade, being able to talk with them and both kind of compromise a little bit would also be really helpful.
Yeah. Or like when I talk to a lot of people about is curfew, right?
Mhm.
Like, if your parents are like, "No, you must be home at 7 PM," and you're like, "I wanna go home at 11," right? If you're willing to compromise at least to start for 7:30 or 8, maybe for a couple of weeks and you're responsible, then you can try to move the needle a little bit more.
Mhm. Yeah. It's definitely easier to try to work with your parents than against them
Yeah,
because a lot of
exactly,
them can
and
be very controlling sometimes when
yeah,
it comes
no,
to
and
rules for their little rowdy teenagers that they're, like, terrified of us doing stupid things and whatnot. So,
Right. And I think being able to sometimes, even if you're able to for a moment, take their perspective, right, which I can hear in what you just said, can sometimes help. That doesn't mean you have to give up everything you want, but I think it might help you to like find a middle path with them.
yeah, definitely. Another group of adults that teenagers have to deal with a lot are teachers. And I know that I've definitely seen people be upset about their grades, complaining about teachers, trying to approach teachers, being like, "This teacher hates me." What skills would you suggest teenagers use at school when it comes to relationships with teachers?
Yeah, yeah. I think both with teachers and with grades, they'll sort of lump together for school. Sometimes it can feel like that's your entire identity, right? Especially for people where school is a huge focus, if not the huge focus, right? And so there's an exercise that I have people do, which is to try to write out, okay, besides the way teachers feel about you and besides your grades, what are the other things that make you you? And so, what I would typically do is let me grab my I only you'll be able to see this or if anybody watches our our video here, but at least you can listen, listeners. So we have a pie chart here. Okay. And the goal is we want to figure out all these different pieces, right, of who you are. And they might not be equal, right? But I think a lot of times people think that the entire circle is school, grades, or teachers. And so, Maria, if you don't mind, can you tell us a couple of other
Oh,
parts of your identity that we can add to this pie besides grades or
oh
school
my
or
gosh,
teachers?
this is actually really tough. I'm on summer break right now, so, like, school is not the biggest thing there, but
Good.
I
That's,
know
yeah.
I know that during the school year, like, my life is school, my life is my grades, and
Yeah.
it's really hard. Okay, so let me think.
So I'll even do two slices here that say grades, one slice, and teachers. But what else is important to you? How else do you see yourself? What else is a part of who you are?
I'd say probably an athlete, well, trying
Mhm.
to be currently a little injured, but
Okay.
athletics are
Well,
definitely
that still counts. It's part of who you are, even if you're injured at the moment.
yeah. I'd say this podcast is on
Mhm.
there too.
Yeah.
I'd also say I'm not sure if this is too close to, like, grades in school, but I always have loved writing.
No,
Like
I think that's different.
okay.
Yeah. I mean, it is right. I know you associate it with school, but I think
Yes.
like you can still write outside of school. So if you're, and you see how I'm writing it. So for people that are just listening, I'm writing grades, teachers, I'm an athlete, and a podcaster and writer, right? As part of who Maria is. Okay. Any others you
Okay.
want to add to that?
Another thing that's kind of related to school because it's something I do at school. Film, I take a film class and I enjoy film and editing and all of
Okay.
all of that.
We'll say film and editor, right? Any
Maybe
others?
ugh, maybe
You can even think of,
sister.
I was just going to
Um,
say, like related to your family. Yeah.
yeah. I
Yeah. Sister. Yeah.
got a little
What?
brother.
Oh,
And
okay.
then if we're going down that route, maybe cat mom. I've got 2
Totally.
little cats.
Yeah, yeah. That's so important. I'm sure it takes a lot of your day, right? So then you can look at this, right? And I think there's this belief that, like, it really is. We just want to help people to understand that school isn't your entire life, even though it really feels that way. And making sure you remember that all these other things are important to you and make you you, right? Because I think we just get stuck with that, like, oh, I didn't like get 100 on my test and therefore I'm a failure and I'm never going to college and I'm just going to like end up on the streets, right? And first of all, we can check the facts on that one. But second of all, there's a lot of other things that are important besides that one test.
Yeah. And it also I mean, at least where I am right now, I'm going into my junior year of high school, so everyone's like, college. I've gotta tour my colleges, I've gotta start really thinking about what I'm gonna present to colleges.
Oh, yeah.
So it seems like so many other parts of our identity we're trying to, like, craft to make it, like, appealing to colleges. So it's like, I'm an athlete. How is that relevant to colleges? I like film. How do I use that for college?
Yes.
Um, how would
Well,
you How would you recommend we separate what we're doing, like, for colleges from, like,
Yeah.
what we're doing because we're passionate about it?
Yeah. It's such an important question. I think this pie, it's almost like if you have a notebook you carry with you, like make your own. And like, I would put it in your like school bag, like have it with you in one of your notebooks for school. Or if you're using a laptop, like make it on the desktop, like on your home screen or whatever, right? Something that you can see all the time. Because I think in the college process, you really can lose yourself a lot, exactly for the reasons you're saying. And it's just so stressful and competitive and awful. But I think being able to like open back to that page to be like, no, this is a real me. All these other things, it's sort of like marketing, right? Or you're like, you're your own publicist in a way, right? You're like figuring out like, what is my public persona that I'm, gonna show? It's like if you were a celebrity, right? Like for everyone famous, right? What you see on their Instagram is not actually like what they're really doing on their like day to day. That it's just how they portray themselves with good reason, right? They have a certain persona. And that's what you guys have to do, unfortunately, for college, right? It's like, okay, what is my college persona going to be? So I can like look the best I can, which you guys have to do, unfortunately. And it sucks. And it's really important to be able to distinguish, okay, like here's the real me. And here's like the stuff I'm going to say. And I think it's hard and it can get like jumbled and then you don't remember what's what. So having this doing this for yourself, looking at it regularly to be like, no, this is the real me. All these things are important, not just that I'm going to like try to get a scholarship for my, athleticism or whatever. And because of that, I have to pretend like that is my entire life, right? Which it's not. And, and that's okay. And that is unhelpful in most parts of your life, except maybe on your college application.
Yeah, I think writing all of that out on the pie chart is such a good tip because you're writing it out. It's something that's physically there, something that can help you to ground yourself into who you are and not let yourself lose sight of all of the different components of your life, all of the things that you're passionate about that may not all necessarily be part of that college package, but are still so important to who you
Yes.
are. Another part of school, there's the academics of at school, but then social life at school is another huge
Yeah.
part of being a teenager, and I know that teenagers, especially I think we've always struggled with social stuff, but especially after COVID, where we're so isolated from each other, and now we have to kind of go back in person and
Yeah.
everything. There's a little bit of social anxiety even though it's been a few years,
I know. It's still
and
going for sure.
yeah.
Unfortunately, still going.
Yeah. What tips do you have for teenagers when it comes to relationships with friends? Because I know at least for myself, I struggle with being insecure in my relationships sometimes and being like, what do they think of me?
Yeah.
And do they not like me? And stuff like that.
Yeah. So this is sort of branching off of the checking the facts skill that I talked about earlier. There are more than the ones I'm going to go over, but several types of thinking mistakes that get us stuck. And there's different categories for them. So I'm going to teach you four of the ones that I think affect really like friendships the most. And the goal is I'll explain them and then, you'd want to sort of catch them because that's your clue to be like, this might not be a fact, right? This might actually be a mistake that my brain is making to get me stuck. So the first one, this is going to sound very obvious, is called mind reading, right? And this is like what I was saying earlier, right? Your friend doesn't text you back for a couple of hours, right? And you're like, they hate me, right? Like, that's it. Like, they don't want to be friends anymore. They're mad at me. I did something. I don't know what I did. I must have ruined the friendship. When literally you have no other information. You're just completely guessing what another person is thinking without any real basis for that. The only facts when it comes to other people is their own words. And other than that, like, they're not actual facts, or their behavior, I suppose. So, mind reading, that's number one, is when you're making assumptions about what another person is thinking without them actually telling you what. The second one is hard to say. It's catastrophizing. So like the word catastrophe, right? But catastrophizing. And that is like, you can think about it like making a long movie about one thing you're worried about. Oh, I didn't study for this test. I'm completely going to fail. And then I'm going to fail out of school. And then I'm going to be left back a grade. And then I'm not going to get into college. And then I'm going to end up living on the streets with no job and no life. That's catastrophizing. You take the one part that, like, I'm not prepared for my test, and you're like, and my life is over, right? It's like the worst thing that could possibly happen. The next one is personalization. Again, kind of what it sounds like, which is like, let's say your friend is kind of irritable or moody, right? And you're like, it must be me. Like they're mad at me. I did something. I like, I probably should have like talked to them for an extra hour last night and I said I need to go to sleep. So they're mad at me and it's my fault, right? When again, probably most times doesn't have anything to do with you, right? And we have no information. And so it's like something happens that likely is unrelated to you, but we make the assumption that it must be us, that we did something. And then the last one I'll talk about is something called emotional reasoning. And emotional reasoning is I feel this emotion, so therefore it must be a fact. Like I am scared that my friend is mad at me, therefore they must be mad at me. Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
that makes a lot of sense, and I definitely feel like that sometimes. I feel like, "Oh, I feel this way," and, like, my intuition is always right, so if I feel like they're mad at me, they're definitely mad at me.
Yes, exactly.
And then what you were saying before about, like, it must about the personalization stuff, I feel like that's also so interesting. I don't remember where I heard this exactly, but I heard something about, like, how people are always thinking so much about themselves that they don't really think about the people around them, and
Yeah.
so chances are that nobody really notices, like,
Yeah.
what
No, well, that's true. And I think a lot of times maybe this is similar. It's a similar point you're making, maybe not in the context of friends or maybe a little bit like maybe you like have a bad hair day, right? And you're like going to school and you're like, I can't believe how awful my hair looks. I can't believe like I didn't get to do anything with it. I forgot to bring a clip. Like I don't know what to do. Right. And like all day you're like, everyone is staring at me. Everyone like thinks that I look horrible. That's another example of personalization, exactly like you're saying, right? Which to your point, it's like, no, most of the time people are very involved in their own stuff and don't notice that kind of thing.
Yeah, they're probably thinking about their own hair or how their socks are
Exactly.
mismatched or something like that.
Yes, exactly.
That's so interesting. But then, on the flip side, it's like, okay, maybe it's not me, but there's always the anxiety, like, what if it actually is? Like, what if you're stressed about the test, failing it, and then you actually, like, do fail, or your friend didn't respond to you, and you talk to them later, and it turns out they were mad at you. How do you cope with that if, like, what your anxiety is telling
Yes.
you actually comes into play?
Yes. So there are other skills for that. I will say the chances of that happening are low, but not zero to your point. Like sometimes your friend is mad at you. So then you have to sort of go into, okay, what is my emotion? How am I feeling? I guess I'm anxious. So maybe you do that ice skill, right, to calm your body down. And then it's sort of like, okay, I guess I'll give you the skill for like, let's say you have to have a difficult conversation with your friend. Maybe they are mad at you. So in any interaction, there are potentially three goals that we have when we're entering an interaction. One is the result, which is like, okay, what do I want the end result to be of this conversation? Maybe I want to make sure we're still friends or that my friend knows I'm sorry or whatever, right? The second one is the relationship. So how do I want my friend to feel about me? And presuming it's a friend you want to still friends with, you want them to like you want them to care about you, to trust you, right? All those things. And then the third one, the third R is respect, which is how do you want to feel about yourself in terms of your own self respect to how you came out of it, which is like, my friend might be mad at me. I don't think there's a reason that they should be mad at me, but they might be. I want to stay calm. I want to say my piece. I want to be clear. And I can't control what they do, but I want to come out of this feeling like I held my own, that I stood up for myself and that I was nice and kind, didn't say anything like to hurt them. And so at least no matter what happens, I can go home and be like, well, I was happy with how I acted at least. Right. And these three are all at play often at the same time. But the problem is sometimes we don't think about which is the priority. And so a lot of times we'll go into an interaction. Maybe this like last one, the respect to ourselves is the priority, but we end up prioritizing how they are going to feel about us because we want them as a friend. And so we kind of like let go of some of our own self respect sometimes, or we don't even know what our goal is. We're like, I'm so sorry that you're upset. I want to talk to you, but I don't really know what my goal in this interaction is other than like, I feel so anxious. I don't like that. And I want to talk to you. And then maybe we don't take the opportunity or we don't do the conversation in a way that's helpful. So I think for if they are mad at you, if something is going on with a friend, it's figuring out and defining what from this interaction is the result, what is the relationship goal that you want, and what is your own respect to yourself that you want.
I That is such an important skill, and just kind of hearing you outline all of that makes so much sense because I know that I myself can be a bit of a people pleaser, and so if somebody's mad at me, my first instinct is just to go in and apologize and be like, "I'm so sorry," but I don't really think about my intentions before I
Yeah.
go in. I don't think about what do I actually want to get out of this because my anxiety around people pleasing and wanting everyone to like me just makes me go, I'll do whatever it takes to make
Yep.
them not mad at me without thinking about my self-respect or like even if I actually want to be friends with them.
Yeah.
So, I think that's just an amazing tip. So, all these CBT tips that you've shared are so helpful and so practical, and like some of them are just absolutely mind blowing. You were talking about like the dive reflex earlier,
Yeah.
and that just honestly blew my mind. What advice do you have for people who might be a little hesitant to trying to incorporate these skills into their life? Because, at least for myself, I know that I am very resistant to trying anything because I always think in like worst case scenario, like what if it doesn't work or I'm different than other people, these won't work for me. So what tips or advice would you have for a listener who may just be resistant to giving this a shot?
What I usually say, and you and many others feel that way, so you all are not alone in feeling uncertain about it, is think about this as an experiment, right? Like, see what happens. If it doesn't go well, then it's not any different than what you've already been doing. But maybe like try that, ice on your face one time when you're feeling really anxious, or maybe do the pie chart of your identity and just see how you feel. I think the question is like, what do you have to lose? Right. And I think, Maria, what you're saying is sometimes you're like, well, if it doesn't work, then like that's just another thing that didn't work. And if that's true, okay, well, then you're not any worse off than you were before. You're just in the same place. But maybe there's a chance that some of these things could actually be helpful. And you're not committing to like change your life and like do it all right now. It's really committing to like just give it a try and see what happens. Just do like a little experiment.
That's really good advice. I'm the kind of person who, like, doesn't wanna try anything because I'm afraid of failing, and it's something that I'm trying to work on, but I I'm gonna try that dive thing, and I'm gonna write down the pie chart and do all of that, and keep all these tips in mind when I feel like they might come into play in my life. So, let's say that somebody tries these tips, they work really well for them, and they wanna try more CBT skills, where can people go to find your book or other resources? Because
Yeah.
I know your book is just full of these amazing techniques and skills.
Yes. Yes. Well, my book is on Amazon, which I feel like is probably the easiest, but it's also at other bookstores and things like that. But for most people, I imagine Amazon is a easy enough place. So you can order it. And, the way that I wrote this is really for people like you that are saying, like, I'm a little hesitant, but I would do want to try something different. You can dip your toe in, read through it. There are worksheets so that you can go through and do each step and it talks along the way. So I think that's a great step to really see what you can do. I will say for some people, the book might not be enough. And sometimes doing therapy is also really important, especially if your anxiety feels like it's really, really getting in the way of your life, where you're having trouble going to school or just your grades are slipping, your relationships with friends are slipping, issues at home are really big. Like The book is a really great jumping off point, but sometimes therapy is really also important. We have a group private practice, Mindwell NYC, that Maria was saying earlier, which is in Chelsea, and we do CBT, but there are a lot of other practices in the city or areas that you can find, CBT if we're not in your neighborhood. So, and, we do virtual also, but I think I always recommend at this point, especially given what you were saying about COVID, it's helpful to be in person to get that practice. But if anybody ever wanted to do virtual, that's also an option. So,
The all sound so, so amazing. And like you're saying, sometimes a workbook isn't enough, and it's really helpful to talk through these skills with an expert like yourself. So, CBT, DBT, and all of this therapy stuff is so it like there's no way to cover it all in one episode, but
no.
is there anything really important that you wanna just share with listeners before we end the episode about CBT or DBT or your practice?
Yeah, I think it's really like there for people that just are constantly struggling and maybe have tried a couple things and they didn't work, I would say don't give up. Certainly if you haven't tried anything, it might be worth trying things, but I get a lot of people here who have seen other therapists, have tried stuff, and it hasn't worked. And sometimes it's not the right therapy. Sometimes it's not the right therapist. And sometimes there are therapists that don't know how to teach these skills very well, unfortunately. And so sometimes you might not be learning the skill the way it's intended to be learned because by learning these skills and doing them as intended, they can be really effective. There's a ton of research and like real research that's gone into all of these strategies to show that for anxiety, for depression, for problems managing emotions, this stuff is extremely effective if it's taught correctly and practiced.
So I guess it's about finding the right therapist, finding skills that work for you because
Yes.
everybody's different in terms of what
Everybody.
works for
Yes.
them. And just because it works for somebody else doesn't necessarily mean that it's gonna work for you, but it's worth giving it a shot just to see.
Yeah, exactly. And even if it's not the right type of therapy, often you can get referrals to help you find the right place if the one you start with isn't.
So, just one more question, kind of tying everything back and together. So, if you had one piece of advice for your teenage self, because I know we've talked about advice for other teenagers, but if you could give your teenage self one piece of advice, what would it be?
I think I would tell myself that the things that felt so, so important then would only be blips in my life later. And I mean, not in a bad way. Like the things that I stressed about, the things that I worried about, the friends that I was so upset about, the romantic relationships that I spent so much time worrying about. At the time, I thought they were going to define me and my life. But then looking back, they're just a part of my story. And so I wish that I would have told myself, don't spend so much time and energy on this stuff. Like, it's okay.
That's really good advice, and especially as a teenager, kind of thinking into the future and being like, "Okay, well, in 20 years, am I really gonna remember that math test I bombed? Probably not."
Exactly, exactly, yes.
Um, but it can feel really hard in the moment
It is
when
so hard. I remember, like, it was so strong, everything was so important, and it's so hard in the moment not to feel that way.
thank you so much for coming on the podcast
You
today.
are
The
welcome.
tips you shared were honestly just so amazing. I'm gonna say it again, they were mind blowing. Like, I'm gonna try them all out, and I hope that listeners try them too, see if they work for them.
I hope so as well. Thank you
Thank
for
you.
having me.
Of course, it's been so amazing. Thank you for listening to the end of this episode of Balancing Act: Life and Struggles of a Teenage Girl. Again, I loved this episode so, so much, and I hope you learned something that you can apply to your life today. Here are my biggest takeaways from our discussion. 1. Anxiety exists for a reason. It used to be helpful in fight or flight scenarios, but now in the modern world, it can be not so helpful when you're trying to take a test and then your brain like freezes on you. 2. That method with the ice that Dr. Hutt shared, I can't say it enough. It absolutely blows my mind. how you can use biology and reflexes that already exist to help us to calm down. Whoa, I'm mind blown. The other day, I felt like I was about to have a panic attack, and I grabbed some ice and I put it under my eyes the way that Dr. Hutt had suggested, and it honestly helped me to calm down so much. I don't know if it was because there was just ice under my eyes and my face was cold or what, but it just felt so nice and so refreshing, and it's worth a shot for if you feel like you're getting anxious sometime and you have ice accessible. 3. We should work with our parents instead of completely against them and move that needle slowly. Don't say, hey, you're completely wrong, because then they get defensive and that's not fun. 4. There's so much more to us as teenagers than just school and our grades. And that skill she shared with writing down all the different parts of our identity can help us really ground ourselves into who we are. And remember that our self-worth is not tied to our grades. There's so much more to us than just what we put on our college brag sheet. 5. When you're interacting with people, you have to remember that you can't mind read. And unless they actually said it, we don't know what they're actually thinking about us or about the situation. 6. Ask yourself what you actually want out of an interaction before going into it. Because too often we can sacrifice our own values out of a need to people please. And if you're trying to resolve a conflict with someone, you're probably going to want to ask yourself first, do I even want to be friends with this person? Why am I trying to do this? And what are my boundaries going into this conversation? And how will I remember to respect what I want? With CBT, it's honestly worth just giving a shot. I'm a person who is so resistant to trying anything new, anything that I think I might fail at doing. But I think that CBT skills are honestly so practical and you can really apply them to your life. But ultimately, it's about what works for you and the skills or techniques or practices that you find work for you, because everyone's different. Thank you for listening to this episode of Balancing Act, Life and Struggles of a Teenage Girl. If this episode resonated with you, or if you know someone it could help, please feel free to share it with your loved ones or on social media. You can find us on Instagram at balancingact.podcast or on our website balancingact.life, which are both linked in the description. If you really want to support the podcast, leaving us a rating, hopefully a good one, on Apple Podcasts or Spotify would be invaluable. If you have any questions or comments about this episode, or if you want to suggest a topic or person for a future episode, please feel free to reach out to us through social media, our website, or email, which you can find on the website. Thanks again for taking the time to listen. I hope you have an amazing rest of your day, and remember, life's a balancing act, and sometimes you fall on your face, but you are not alone.